Hi, this is Frontpage, and we are assessing Pakatan Harapan's 1 year in Putrajaya with a bit of a report card here on Lite. Now, I have with me a panel of esteemed journalists here to give their final assessment on the governance of Pakatan Harapan. So, there were a lot of mixed feelings, and I'm going to cite a survey that was put up on Lite's website. Do you still believe in the idea of a new Malaysia? That was the question that was asked, and 55% of the respondents said yes, and 27% said no. So there was about 19% that's still undecided. Saiwan, what do you make of this? A large majority of Lite's respondents are still very optimistic of the idea of a new Malaysia. Are you?
I am, of course. I mean, May 9 last year was a tremendous experience for everybody. It was people's power at its very real. I think the 55% support for Malaysia Baru is about the victory margin that Pakatan Harapan had. At the end of the day, if you look at the whole thing, look, 55% was exactly or almost close to it what was Pakatan Harapan's victory. Malaysia Baru is a wonderful concept. Malaysia showed to everybody in the world. It's the first time that a British colony, ex-British colony, overthrew its government at the ballot box. Okay? It has never happened before.
What is Malaysia Baru to you, Saiwan?
Malaysia Baru to me is that an entire new generation coming in and taking over and doing something new. I have been advocating that any company that's in trouble, the CEO should be 40 years old or less. The new CEO must come in at that, because we in our 50s obviously can't manage. If we can manage, that company would not be in trouble. And the same thing here.
Bagarin, are you as optimistic as Saiwan?
Yes, but depends on the respondent's racial background. I'm not sure, because race and religion has been a big issue in New Malaysia.
Okay.
Not new at all. It's new in the sense of changing towards racism. Okay, having said that, I think, like the 57%, I'm very happy, very hopeful. To me, New Malaysia means the multiracialism that has happened, that has formed the new government, and I was thinking that they'd go a step further and introduce meritocracy, maybe not absolutely, but a more balanced percentage in terms of university intake, or matriculation intake, but that did not happen. And I think the biggest New Malaysia is there's no sign of corruption, at least externally, and I don't think it's going to happen inside, because it's going to leak, news will leak, and I am very happy that kleptocracy and corruption are not part of the current government. Yeah. That's a new Malaysia I'm happy.
You mean among the politicians? Or do you mean among this entire government machinery?
Everywhere. I think it's
I think we just had a report of 32 JPJ officers just arrested.
So the idea
but they are part of the old government as well.
No, the action was over a recent event.
Right.
So it's the elected representatives, is what you're saying, right? Okay.
But it will trickle. It will go into the system, because people are
leadership from the top.
Leadership. Previously, it's from the top, and everybody was like becoming part of it. But I think it is changing, because I hear people actually telling, "Oh, I'm afraid this new government will catch up with me." Government servants telling me that. Yeah.
Okay, so systemic corruption is no longer tolerable in Malaysia Baru. Gayatri, are you optimistic?
I am, because I think it's a real feeling of, I think what is most important is for people to know that there are different ways of doing things, that it is possible. And the fear tactic for so many decades, right? That if you vote a different government, you're going to be chaotic, la la la. I think completely just threw out of the window.
Until today, I'm still waiting for the phone call from PMO or from the Home Ministry or MCMC. I'd like to report I've not had a single phone call.
Yeah,
and that's press freedom, isn't it?
I do not know whether it's press freedom or Malay Mail doesn't matter.
I'll let you answer that.
I think that's the thing, right? I mean, to know that, to be able to say that here are ways in which we can govern the country, or that this is what we should expect of those in power. That I think that's a very important turning point. I don't think that we are the trendsetters saying that after so many years, because so many other countries have actually had the change in government. Take India, for example, large
No,
democracy.
India,
I think the
India went through emergency rule, and then they were thrown out.
No, but I'm just saying that it's. I think given the current context in which we are seeing the kinds of populist politics and the whipping up of a lot of sentiments, I think ours was quite remarkable in that sense. And I think the lesson being that actually we can demand for a different kind of governance. It's okay. It is our right to do that, and we can actually get on with business if we're clear what you want to do, and it works. I think that maybe it's too soon to say whether the systemic problem of corruption we can really address it now, but I think there are good signals to say that this is not to be tolerated anymore. So I think to me that's what Malaysia Baru actually means.
Terence. For you personally, what do you think it means?
Well, it just means, it's a big deal, of course. It just means that finally my vote means something. That the power is returned to my hands to choose my government, and that's what everybody feels. That's what Malaysia Baru is all about. That the power is returned to me, and it would be wise for the present government and the current opposition, who might be the next government, you never know, to have that in mind. That the power is finally returned to the people. And the fact that we can sit down here and discuss it and name names and talk about almost anything without being censored.
And call people by certain names.
And call people by certain names, exactly. Shows that we've come a long way in such a short time.
Well, I have to say also, the fact that we are now holding this government accountable and in check. I mean, when was the last time we did a report card on the Pakatan National government a year after re-winning an election?
Re-winning. There was a 100-day after the 2008 elections and after Najib came into power. There was a mix of sort of assessment, because he had very strong lobbies in that sense, right, across the board, so the picture was extremely positive. But you're right in the sense that we couldn't do the kind of assessment, not that we didn't, we still did it, but whether it got into the mainstream, and I think that was
important, we could try that, discuss it openly.
So in this episode of Front Page, what we're going to do is kind of do a wrap-up of all the conversations that we've had in the previous episodes, right? So there were a lot of interesting things that we brought up in the past few episodes that perhaps I want to expand on a little bit. One of the things, Terence, you brought up in a previous episode was the role of UMNO in this past year. Barisan Nasional, in fact, and the cooperation, or what it seemed to be cooperation with PAS. So, how would you assess UMNO as opposition in the last 1 year?
I think they're doing quite okay as an opposition, because they have the facts and figures which they keep.
They have the experience, right?
The experience is one. The facts and figures are another one. Khairi is doing a great job in calling out the present government on some of the initiatives.
Is Khairi the only one relevant still in UMNO?
Is the only one that comes to mind at the moment, actually. But I would think that maybe, speaking of Khairi, I think maybe it's a good time to also think about a third force. Why do we have to be confined to just Pakatan Harapan and UMNO and Barisan Nasional? Why can't we think of another party that will give these two guys a run for their money? And I think somebody like Khairi, or maybe Khairi himself, could play that role.
Well, the idea of UMNO as an opposition have been, I guess, the voice of UMNO as an opposition has gotten louder to play into the fears and insecurities of the rural Malays, of the rural heartland of Malaysia, and I think that has been brought into sharp focus with their cooperation or their friendship, we'll say, with PAS, a friendliness with PAS. Now, how much of a threat is that? How much of a distraction is that, as you used that word in one of the first episodes, to Pakatan Harapan's governance of Malaysia?
Actually, UMNO has not changed its tactics, and neither have PAS. The only difference is that for once they're doing it as an opposition party in 10 out of 13 states. Okay, I think it's more of how will Pakatan Harapan react to UMNO continuing with its tactics. UMNO has not changed its tactics. What has happened is Najib has fallen, Zahid has fallen, Mat Hassan is up there, and Mat Hassan is playing that game very well. Is how do they tackle that game that UMNO plays? At the moment, they don't seem to be doing it quite successfully because they had to, as Tara said, flip, flop, and that doesn't argue well with Malay voters.
Okay. The sentiments, yeah.
They prefer a firm hand that is decisive. So I think it's got nothing to do with UMNO and PAS. They're doing what naturally comes to them.
So the question is whether Pakatan Harapan will become more like...
No, whether they're able to deal with that.
I see.
I'm not saying that. I think one of the good things about Malaysia Baru is that we don't have to repeat what we did in 2013, 2012, 2011, right until 1997. Just because you're radical, I must be more radical than you. I dare hope that possibly you're radical, I become more liberal. Would I be able to attract more people to my side than your side? I hope that Pakatan Harapan do not fall into that trap because UMNO has basically set up the trap down there, and this guys just seem to be walking right into it.
So that's their playbook, and we know that is.
Because if you look at Anwar Ibrahim in Port Dickson, he did it quite well. He avoided all the radical and extremist views, and I mean, as I said, he was a chameleon. He was able to go to the Indian community and say what he wanted to say. He was able to go to the Chinese community and say what he say. He was able to go to the Malay community and say what he say. But he avoided that. I mean, we must remember that Negeri Sembilan is Mat Hassan's country, okay? And Anwar went in there and had the biggest majority ever in the history of Port Dickson. Okay, so I'm hoping that they will continue not to fall into UMNO's trap.
Bakran, how do you think Pakatan Harapan has been dealing with UMNO as an opposition?
I think talking about the past UMNO alliance, some of us are underestimating the danger. That's my personal view, because if you study the election results, it's quite frightening. And if you see social media posts, reaction, commentaries are really scary, because they have successfully united to use DAP, to attack DAP. They can't attack Chinese directly. So they use DAP as a Chinese party that's controlling the government. And it's been quite successful based on the reactions. So how Anwar is going to handle it is going to be very important when he becomes Prime Minister. Because Mahathir is not handling it in a manner that he should right now.
Right.
Because that's Mahathir's style. I don't think he'll go into that micromanagement style.
Well, there's been a lot of talk that Pakatan Harapan has failed in capturing the hearts of the rural Malays. Do you agree with that?
Can I? Yeah. So I think the one reality that definitely came out during the by-elections is that even in opposition, the sort of control to the grassroots, the infrastructure where you have access to the grassroots is still dominated by UMNO and PAS.
PAS especially.
Not by Pakatan Harapan, right?
No, they just do a better job of it, that's all.
No, but I think in terms of the people who are at the grassroots levels, who have access to the individual households,
what you realize that is, they
just
reactivated the old
ways of doing it, So it's not new. I agree in the sense that it's not new.
Not Najib's UMNO, but
the previous
one, Mahathir's UMNO.
Which we actually saw most clearly in 2008 when we realized how deeply entrenched these structures were.
Right.
So if you don't get that, or you don't find a way of addressing that, then you're always going to not be able to appeal. I think it's wrong to think that in order to appeal to the Malays that you must talk a certain language or certain politics. I don't think that's fair, because I think many of them across the country have different issues and are actually plugged into many sort of things that we talk about, even like today, right? Or even the previous episodes about cost of living and what corruption actually means as well. So it's not about replicating it, but I think to recognize that is a huge gap for Pakatan. And so you're not in the places where people are trusting you because you're not close enough to the grassroots.
How do they get close to the grassroots?
Well, that's the thing. You have to dismantle some of the structures. You have to find ways of creating spaces where then these people can have access to. So maybe not fight necessarily at the same place, and I'm talking about surawas, I'm talking about community centers, right? You have to find ways in which people then can access.
Well, what keeps them together is race and religion, basically.
No, but you see, but
I mean, that's their
sure.
point.
It's
So
I mean,
how do you
identity,
dismantle that?
Yeah, identity
that-
is very difficult
Identity.
We tend to forget GE13. Okay, we just think of GE14 is something that is surprising,
Yeah.
and it just happened.
What
It
do you think,
didn't.
Taiwan?
Because if you look at GE12, 13 and 14, you could see the trend was there. And what happened in GE13? The folks in town went home and told their mothers and fathers, trust me, don't vote Barisan. Now, can they convince those guys to go back hometown now and says, trust me, being radical is not the way to go. Being extremist is not the way to go. You're falling for the same trap. You know, why has everyone forgotten what they did in G13?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think really tapping into that, and that's where maybe the gap is, right? I mean, they're not. So when things happen, they're reactionary. Pakatan is reactionary because you think by then saying that no, we're not going to give up on Islam or Bumiputra rights, therefore you will win the votes. It doesn't translate automatically into support because you still have to go and do the groundwork.
Right.
Right? And maybe that's what Terence said.
Yeah.
You have the machinery.
Yeah.
Maybe you should do that.
No,
but it is
well,
communication.
actually what
machinery.
happens is that when they go and say that, they're just confirming to UMNO's and PAS's messages that Bumiputra and Malay rights and religion are paramount.
So
Yeah,
are you?
yeah.
Do you see under Pakatan Harapan's government that we cannot do away with identity politics
No,
just yet?
You also understand the psyche of the leader from Pakatan Harapan who's going down to try to disseminate this message. If I talk about LGBTQ rights, if I talk about Rome Statute, if I talk about ISET, if I talk about a non-Malay, if I promote a non-Malay finance minister, a non-Malay attorney general, am I being less of a Malay and less of a Muslim myself? If I talk about sending Zakir Naik home, am I being less of a Muslim? Because that is what's thrown back at you. And that's why if you're talking about politicians who fall, or political leaders who fall right into UMNO and PAS's trap, Mujahid Rawal is one good example. He is very liberal, but at the same time, a very devout Muslim. He started this whole visit to churches program. He initiated it. But today you can see that he's so spooked by anything to do with a semblance of anything anti-Islamic. And PAS and UMNO just rise on it. And right now, because they're the opposition, this thing is amplified. What I would like to commend the MCA, rightly or wrongly, for deciding to stick with Barisan Nasional. Maybe because they can't find any other political life outside of BN. But say for instance in 2023, if Barisan comes back as a government, at least the non-Malays, through the Chinese at least, will have a seat at the table.
Hey, don't forget MIC. They got more seats than MCA.
Well, I also don't want to leave East Malaysia out of the conversation.
course.
Because Pakatan Harapan has also, I mean, how would you assess Pakatan Harapan's government and their engagement of East Malaysia?
The very fact that Barisan Nasional MPs voted against the 1963 amendment to make them equal partners shows that they are done and dusted in Sabah and Sarawak.
Yeah, that was one point I wanted to make. That but I don't think they're done and dusted because when you speak to the Sarawakians, that amendments were not really comprehensive. It was just a changing of word. There was no full commitment. Just the amendment for a start. So
That was the start, though.
Yeah, that was the start.
Yeah.
Yeah, but people wanted more.
But
So
they already showed
apparently-
their insincerity from
the
at the start.
Sarawakians, yeah.
No, but I think going forward to to G15, I think Sabah and Sarawak would be the kingmakers. They would be the kingmakers, regardless of which alliances Sabah is.
They are
with.
right now, right? Number of MPs.
No, I mean no. The problem is that they are so split and divided. They can't play kingmaker.
Right.
I think come G15, I think the political leaders on both sides of the divide in Sabah and Sarawak will realize the power they have, and I believe that they will exercise it very strongly. So if we were discussing about who the Deputy Prime Minister out together with Anwar, let's not forget Sarawakian or a
Absolutely.
Sabahan.
Oh,
Yeah.
very
Interesting.
interesting. That's very
Absolutely.
interesting. Right, one of the words that has been used quite a fair bit in the last year, I think, has been the word U-turn. I mean, I've used the word so much more outside the car than I have, inside the car. So let's talk about U-turns with this Pakatan Harapan government, and from everything from. I don't know. I mean, we've heard so many international treaties, all sorts of policies, mega projects. Where would you start? How would you pinpoint how much U-turns affect voter sentiment towards the government?
I think the U-turns where the international treaties are concerned, I think strategically it was wrong for Pakatan to do it now. You've got 5 years to implement your reforms. Focus on the economy. Why do you want to agitate the Malays, the Muslims, the royalty by trying to ratify all this?
They are not even low-hanging fruits anyway.
They're not low-hanging fruits anyway.
So you feel like this was the wrong time?
It's all time. You've got 5 years. Do it in your 4th year or your 5th year. Now focus on the economy.
Well, the fourth or fifth year is very.
Okay, do it in your 3rd year.
sensitive, right?
Do it in your 3rd year.
Middle.
But so with that argument, then you also give credit to the fact that it is about eroding some people's rights, which I don't think it does, because that's not the point of these treaties.
It is
but also
strategically.
Well, of course, there can be a strategic discussion, but I think the problem, particularly with ISET, for example, was that as I understood it, the government actually had plans to conduct consultations. And they should have mentioned that before actually saying that this is what we're going for.
Okay.
I don't think the timing is wrong either. I don't think so. Because I think that these are processes that take time. And in the case of the Rome Statute, as we understood it as well, it's something that has been considered
by the BN
before
government
already
Yes.
by the BN government. So I think it's not so much the fact that it's going to cost them the votes, but I think the way in which it was maybe
Communicated.
or not communicated, right? Because there was a plan to conduct consultations. And I think that would have been to start off by saying, we're going to get people to, you don't have to frame it as this is particularly about ISET, but actually what ISET represents in terms of the values of Pakatan
That's
Harapan
what
itself.
Terence and I are saying. They could have done it so differently.
Yes.
And
Clearly,
and don't put it to a vote and let it drag to the 3rd year.
Correct.
But a vote, right? There's
You
no
don't
need
need
to
to
vote.
win today.
No, I'm saying that vote. You don't have to win
Cabinet
it.
decision.
You don't have to win it today.
But it's a thing that requires so much of groundwork anyway. I mean, of course, we can say that some are more of priority than the others. But I also think that by saying that, why agitate, I think it's then giving into the point that indeed it actually affects other people's rights. And I don't think so. I think we should say that it doesn't erode others' rights in order to...
No, we are just saying as a strategy.
Strategically,
Sure.
if we were advising Pakatan Harapan, not that they take our advice anyway.
And do you think the opposition is going to keep quiet because strategically
No, they will
Yeah,
find
they will
anything.
not.
I mean,
Okay,
in
can I
politics,
just
And
say
even if
fine.
they ratify, do you think the minorities will be less discriminated against?
No, but that
Although
requires
there's something
but that's a
in Geneva?
different that's a different discussion, and I think that one has to give room for the international
Yes.
conventions, because
Yes.
if we take the one that has been ratified, which is CEDAW. There has been a case in court that's now setting the standard based on principles in the CEDAW. So I think that it's maybe to
CEDAW is
the Convention on the Elimination of
Discrimination
all forms of discrimination
against
against women.
Women, yeah.
So there is value to it, and I think it's important to communicate what's in there. I will say that yes, maybe strategy-wise.
CEDAW is not going to stir up any negative emotions because we are all.
Do you know that we have reservations in CEDAW? There are negative emotions about it. There are. The government
has
of
to do with
Malaysia has.
religion and-
okay, that as well. Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
So I think that.
So back to that again, religion.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that you don't bring it out and actually discuss it. I think that the point was, for the government to make it very clear that they were going to start a series of consultations. I think they should have done that
very
in
quickly
the beginning.
Terence's comment about this is the wrong time. We spoke in a few episodes ago about Dr. Mahathir and the limited time he has as Prime Minister. Do you think the timing was done because we have a strong man in the office?
You must understand the person who's responsible for reforms as per the Pakatan Harapan agreement is Anwar Ibrahim, not Mahathir. Mahathir is supposed to put Najib in jail, fix our economy, bring some money back.
And
Anwar
Anwar Ibrahim is the reformist.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Got it.
Okay, we're talking about U-turns, right? Let's be fair to the Pakatan Harapan government. Without being an apologist for Barisan Nasional, I think most of the policies and projects by the Barisan Nasional government make sense. It's just the costing,
Yes.
the corruption, and the transparency is missing. If you really wanted to do something, at the end of the day, that was a good plan anyway. You know, it's just that you can't call it the Najib's plan. Probably have to U-turn and call it something else.
Just like Permata to
To what?
Genius.
Genius. You know, look. I mean, there were a lot of intelligent people behind all these plans. They were not all stupid. They were all not corrupted, and many of the plans have got sensibility to it. So it's unfair to say the government U-turn. They had no choice, but it was a good idea.
I mean, I've got this view on U-turn. You know, all of us must have an option to make a U-turn in our lives.
Once
Seriously, I mean,
once maybe
on the road or in our lives, we all have made U-turns when things had to be changed. So Pakatan had to make a U-turn to make things better. So what's wrong with that?
Yeah, I guess it's a question of whether it was a U-turn or it was a kind of a rash response. Because I think it's like, as you say, you know, with the projects, you know, I think maybe some of it were U-turn, but I think like in the case of like ISED and also the Rome Statute, I feel like there is a political play going on. We all know that, right? Nothing is, you know, devoid of this political haggling. I think that was probably uncalculated move, but also its response was even worse.
Okay.
I think the response was far worse.
Maybe they should not have let Vedamurti lead that.
I agree.
We've got about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to give each of you a minute for final thoughts. Let's hear your final assessment of Pakatan Harapan 1 year in Putrajaya. I'm going to start with you, Pak Rumpis.
There are several setbacks. There have been several mistakes. But I think you should allow them the mistakes. They were not major, like what we talked of the ISED U-turn or Rome Statute U-turn. But I would urge Malaysians to stand by the government, which has made tremendous improvement in the nation in terms of getting rid of a kleptocrat and a corrupt cabinet and corrupt institutions. I think that is it. We live with a clean government, and we don't want a kleptocrat back in Malaysia.
All right, thank you, Park. All right, let's go. Saiwan.
I still say it's too early to judge them, but their 1 year has been very interesting. I mean, as a working journalist, I found the last 1 year to be very confusing. I mean, appearing on this show talking about this, really, I mean, I was on the way back to the office, I'm expecting that phone call. You know? That hasn't come. So, good for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe just a message that, you know, there will be a lot of critics, but there are also critics because we value whatever freedoms we get, whatever opportunities we get, and we are in this for the long haul. We've always been in this for the long haul, and I think that, you know, also, you know, saying that if there are indeed criticisms, it's because we don't want, you know, the previous ways of working to get back into,
Right.
you know, our
We know what
our
that's like.
system.
We don't want
Yeah,
that.
and we don't want that, but also that we are invested. And I think that, you know, when sometimes we are told, oh, you know, these are unfair criticisms, or, you know, dismissed as urban elites, as, you know, we mentioned earlier. No, because we are invested in the process. We do whatever we can in our own ways, you know, to also push the agenda forward. I think those who need support and have been doing a good job should be commended for it. But I also think that we are in this, you know, in our own ways to push that reform agenda. So I think that, you know, I would say to the PH government, take the criticism, because actually we are all invested in this process. We want to have a vision, we want to move forward. And, you know, many of us can be allies actually.
Terence.
Well, look, we the people, we appreciate, all right, that this band of misfits, of strange bedfellows, this motley crew, have come banded together to basically save the country. Okay, we've established that, we appreciate it, but I agree with Saiwan that it's a bit too soon to, he's given C, a C minus at the beginning of the show.
Okay, C+,
But-
C+.
Okay, C plus.
Let's
We
start
give
with
it
it.
a C+.
Just keep to the agenda, keep to the manifesto, just look forward, you know, and just be focused on what the agenda is and what the reforms are and what you need to do, and everything else will fall into place. You know, as we speak, we are talking about that. You know, there's no more, there's no corruption, or there's corruption has reduced, but there's still a lot of integrity issues within Pakatan Harapan. Okay, there are a lot of deal makers that's running riot around town, you know, knocking on doors and trying to take over companies and GLCs, you know, and whatnot. The ministers themselves may not be tainted, but they really need to do some house cleaning.
Yes.
If not many of them, I would say all of them need to look at their respective ministries and their respective offices, and do some major housekeeping.
Wonderfully said. I want to thank all of you for being on Front Page. That's all the time we have for Front Page today. And thank you for your assessment
Thank
of
you.
Pakatan Harapan's
Thank you.
report card in this last year.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Welcome.